I would actually love to jump into the Reddit rabbit hole now.
Okay,
And
cool.
have you answer some of the questions from the Reddit community. So I'm going to read the first one. Let's start with this one. So which psychedelic has the most therapeutic potential?
Yeah, so if I'm looking at what's available to to most Americans today,
right,
we're likely looking at those big four, but really it's three right now. It's psilocybin. I would probably throw cannabis in that mix as well, but again, like you've heard about me talk about that from a cultural and legal perspective. Right. So psilocybin, ketamine, MDMA seem to be what's available to people. I think that in the recreational or non-therapeutic context, there's certainly accessibility to LSD, which I think is also a very powerful substance and medicine, which is also synthesized from a fungus. It's the ergot fungus that, so there's something there as far as like what's natural and what's not. I look at this through the lens of like practicality. What can you access? What can you test? If you're getting a powder or something, can you put a fentanyl strip on it? Can you test it for potency? We're very lucky to have this type of science and technology nowadays.
Right.
And then I think from there, I think about the anecdotal, like therapeutic effects. So if you haven't had any psychedelic or let's call like consciousness altering experiences before, then I do believe that many folks, if it were legal, would say MDMA could be your pathway. It can be a little bit more gentle. It's called an empathogen, which means that it creates deeper connection with yourself and those around you, and maybe that of the world. However, MDMA has a really stronger bioload, which means that it just like wears on your system a little bit more, especially when the dosage is incorrect. And we're talking about, differences in dosage in, milligrams, whereas the difference in dosage with psilocybin is in grams, and the difference in dosage in LSD is micrograms. So there's a scaling effect here. And so, with MDMA, you are probably going to be a little bit more depleted in serotonin afterwards. You would definitely have to do a little bit more like physical recovery and things like that. I think that ketamine has its plus and minuses and would be really geared for folks who have a lower legal risk tolerance. So they're trying to find a legal aspect of this. And so ketamine being a Schedule 3 narcotic, you can prescribe it for off-label use. So what we're seeing now are ketamine clinics that can do intravenous or intramuscular, which are like big dosages. And then we're also seeing like at-home program with a sublingual, oral, or nasal spray of ketamine as well. Ketamine also has a higher tendency for a habitual use and misuse. What I would say out of those four. And what I share with ketamine, when used in the right context, with the right support, when viewed through an integrative health lens, you should have good prep, you should have a sitter, you should have good integration. I've heard so many horror stories around ketamine clinics.
Me too.
And, like literally doctors like dropping people off in this, like, okay, you're done, like let's get out of here, or like get an Uber now. And I'm like, okay, this is terrible. But like I think in the right context, ketamine has been in my own life a very, very powerful substance, and also has this edge of misuse. So what I share there is that if you are newer to psychedelics, you're probably wanting to microdose psilocybin because of accessibility, or maybe get into an at-home ketamine program. If your healing process was a door, a portal, or a pathway, and there's a lock to that door, then ketamine can maybe unlock that door a little bit and like crack it open a little bit. And then it comes to this thing where like you then also got to push that door open and decide to walk through and decide to see what's on the other end.
Right.
And so it can be a good introductory thing. And I also see people using ketamine in conjunction with psilocybin as well. Psilocybin is like my go-to in a lot of different ways, my own personal life and whatnot. What I think with psilocybin is I use this analogy of what happens in nature. So LSD to me is more cerebral. It relates you to yourself in relation to the world. And I think that there's like a cognitive component to it. Also depends on who's making the LSD and chemical profiles and stuff like that. But with psilocybin, I think it allows people to do a really, really big deep dive into themselves. So it's very much a more like internal process. How I describe it is this. Psilocybin comes from a fungus, which comes from a mushroom. A mushroom is the visible fruiting body in a larger fungal network called the mycelial network. Mycelial network being the stuff that's in soil. And so in the role of ecosystems, mycelial networks and fungus are what decomposes matter. It takes matter and breaks it down and then turns it into something that can be beneficial to the ecosystem. And so when I take that same analogy, I think it does the same with humans. It has this ability to decompose the stuff that doesn't serve us and then serve it up in a way that can actually benefit our minds, our souls, our bodies, and whatever.
That's continuously in LA specifically, hearing more and more openness around it. I feel like even 5-6 years ago, people were whispering like, I've tried psilocybin. Now
it's cool to say.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a whole topic in itself, as you were talking about psychedelic cheerleading. But anyway, I digress.
It's all good. I can't even do psilocybin out in public anymore. It's like definitely such a personal at home, like in private containers type thing.
Right. Absolutely. And so next question in the Reddit rabbit hole. So someone posted, they said, psychedelic question, will I share my secrets to people if I take shrooms? Which I thought,
well,
I know.
That's a pretty interesting question. So I'll start with a little bit of an anecdote here. Back in the 1960s, at the same time that the government was saying these things are bad for you, don't experiment with them, all of that stuff, they were actually running a lot of secret government experiments designed for military use. And so what they were doing, and I know that this is about mushrooms, but what they were doing was they were putting people in a padded room. They had a whole bunch of, scientists and psychologists and stuff in these white lab coats. They would dose people for LSD. I think this was the MK Ultra project. And they were dosing people with LSD to see if it increased, like clairvoyant properties, remote sensing properties, and then also trying to figure out if it can be a truth serum in interrogation and, torture. And so what they were doing was they were putting people in this room. They're like, okay, this is going to release their inhibitions. They're going to be able to tell us like all of this stuff. And people ended up having really adverse and negative experiences. They started having these bad trips. And so what they said was that LSD is the thing that's causing these folks bad trips. But I would say that if you've ever been interrogated by the police, if you've ever been confined in a room and had people peppering you with the most deep, personal questions, you're going to have a bad time regardless of whether you're sober or not.
Yes.
And so what I share with, psychedelics, especially mushrooms, is that there is this thing, this is commonly known, there is this effect called the non-specific amplifier effect. And what that means to me is that there are things deep in our unconscious that come up to the surface and express themselves in our consciousness, which then allows us to come in closer contact with them to deal with them. And I also think that this depends on dosage.
Right.
But I've never had, me personally, a psychedelic experience where where my like discernment and filtering was completely shut off. I think that there can be people in like ecstatic or mystical experiences, or if you take too high of a dosage that you're not prepared for, who likely will divulge some things that are of a secretive nature, that are of a sensitive nature, but it is certainly not the same as some type of a truth serum where all of a sudden you take mushrooms and the filter's off and you're like sharing all of that stuff. I also think that your mind has this really powerful protective mechanism
Right.
where sometimes people will not remember or have lapse in memory if there's a real traumatic experience that comes up. So will you share your secrets to people if I take mushrooms? Well, the whole point of therapeutic psychedelic experiences is that you shouldn't be suffering in secret anymore.
Right.
So I think if you have a good intention of why, then you likely will be able to target the content that needs to come up. And here's where you need somebody who can hold the highest level of confidentiality, the highest level of non-disclosure, the highest level of non-judgmentalness. And then if that person doesn't have agenda, then they should be able to hold that, I think, in a really powerful and beautiful way. So a little bit of a mixed answer there, but I think there's a lot of nuance to this one that I find interesting.
Yeah, super, super interesting. Super interesting. And that's where that facilitator becomes really important, as you said, like holding that space for someone, you know, when things are coming up, and respecting and protecting that, you know, as well is really important. I have one more question for you down the Reddit rabbit hole.
Okay.
I thought this was an interesting one. So after much work and healing, did you get to enjoy fun trips? And the person goes on and on, I'm not going to read the full thing, but they start off, for so many years, I've only had dark experiences. And they kind of end with, you know, talking about, I'm wondering if any of you were able to actually have fun recreational experiences after therapeutic sessions. So would love to get your take on that.
It's like saying, will I ever enjoy my life again after going through a grief process or a traumatic process? And for many people, it might feel really hard to do that. I certainly now always view my psilocybin work in a therapeutic and ceremonial context. And as I'm doing a lot of deep work, I'm having a lot of fun. Like, one of the themes of my life is living at the intersection of fun and meaningful. And so for me, it's kind of gotten to a point where, again, this is the misnomer of therapeutic work, where we're like, it's all about revisiting your trauma and reliving that, and it's going to be terrible, and I got to go to battle with my biggest demons. And yeah, all of that can be included. And I've also seen people have deeply blissful experiences with psychedelics, which can be pretty fun. Or maybe you get out of going toe to toe with your biggest demons and you come out and you're like, wow, I'm way more resilient than I thought. Oh, look at what I did. That sense of accomplishment can be fun as well. So I think that there is a big case also for therapeutic benefit in recreational contexts. And my dear friend, Sarah Gale, who's well known in the psychedelic space, spoke about this a little bit at the last a psychedelic science conference. I think the key here is that all of this stuff happens in timing and in season. So what I share with folks, my best advice for folks is, you don't want to be running headstrong into this type of work all the time. You got to take breaks. You got to know when to rest. And I actually believe that levity is one of the most powerful medicines in this work, because if we take ourselves way too seriously all the time, then we don't have the counterbalance. Like, good only exists because there's evil, and vice versa, right? And so I think it's the same with real serious experiences and with fun. And I have a lot of fun doing this work, but then also I live at this intersection of this therapeutic work, this ceremonial work, which I take very seriously, and then also to commune with nature, also to go to a music festival and be in like that type of community. And so that is also why I really believe in this universal skills thing, because you can't say in a life experience, like, am I ever, after this much work and healing, am I ever gonna enjoy again? Which I think is a very valid question for people. But when you look at psychedelic experiences as a microcosm for the life experience, it kind of becomes an absurd question. Like, it's all of it, you know? And so it depends on how you look at it. Now, if you're just seeking it for fun, then you're probably only scratching the surface of what's available there for you. But I believe in the deep sovereignty in everybody's choice. And if you just wanted to look at this thing recreationally for fun, I'm like, more power to you. If you're not hurting anybody,
right,
and you're not hurting yourself, like, go for it. And so I think there's this really delicate dance. And I think that our brains and our systems are actually wired to learn the most in play.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more.
And so you do need some play. And I think that when I talk about this thing about being in relationship with yourself, I think that people can do a lot of great benefit by just like being a kid a little bit,
right?
Which denotes having a little bit of fun, hopefully. I know not every kid gets to experience that.
Right. I love that. I feel like we undervalue play. We undervalue,
for sure,
like curiosity. It's like, okay, now you're an adult, so everything's super serious, which some people are in a life situation where that is what's being called of them. But, I think that there is opportunity for levity and for play and, it just facilitates a different type of growth, I feel like, which is so important. So I love that you said that.
If you have the ability to laugh at yourself deep from the soul, you probably have a lot of potential for healing.
I agree. I think it's so important. I realize sometimes I look at myself, I'm like, half the things I'm doing are absolutely ridiculous. So for me to